We can take the first step toward realizing anarchy by breaking the hold the state still has on people's imaginations. I think it's marvelous that this weekend's amazing Libertopia convention, at which I've had an unbelievable time, happens next door to the Hollywood Expo. The fact that next door to us are people committed to envisioning an alternate world, to envisioning an exciting, peaceful world, is really amazing. I don't think it's a coincidence that there are so many libertarian and anarchist science fiction fans. Because if you're going to believe in the possibility of a better world, it sure helps to have a good imagination. Once we realize that the emperor is not wearing anything at all, and once we help other people realize the same thing, we can really begin to make progress. The state is simply a group of people no different from your neighbors, with no more authority, no greater right to tell you what to do. And when we begin to strip away the illusion that the state is anything other than that, we make a huge difference. It is a pure myth that the state represents us in any meaningful sense, that when politicians and generals act, they're acting on our behalf. The people who make and implement state decisions are pursuing their own agendas, very often in conflict with our interests, just like powerful people do in other institutions, often in large organizations. You know, a lot of us have seen increasing evidence of this in the research that's come out, a lot of it actually just in the last year or two, highlighting the similarity in personality type between the people who rise to the top of organizations, certainly including states, and sociopaths. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. So it's funny then that despite all of the reasons to doubt that the state has anything to be said in its favor, there are still people who think it can be fixed. There are still people who hold the bizarre notion that really all we need is to throw the rascals out. And there's something just, I think, deeply bizarre about that. They think if corruption is eliminated, if the right politicians are elected, if this or that reform is implemented, things are going to be okay. Now, obviously, things are never going to be okay as long as people exercise illegitimate authority. But even if you put aside the issue of illegitimacy, it's just bizarre to think that rotating a few people out is going to make a difference. It's bizarre because, first of all, the people in charge are not a random sample of the population. As Hayek famously said, you know, the worst come out on top. We've already talked about the fact that the sociopaths get selected for leadership positions. In addition, people who might be fairly decent when they find themselves in positions of power are likely readily to succumb to the temptations associated with that power. Furthermore, even when there are genuinely well-intentioned people, they lack, this is the point of all of the knowledge arguments about the state, they lack the ability to make good decisions. They don't have the knowledge. Nobody has the knowledge to make the decisions that states claim to be able to make. And so even well-intentioned people are going to screw up. And when they have access to the power that the state affords them, their mistakes can have devastating consequences. Bottom line, the state isn't going to be fixed. We're not going to be able to fix the state, nor do we have any reason to want to do so. The problem is not that this or that group of people run the state. The problem is the state. The good news, though, is that ordinary people can craft and maintain effective ways of living together and solving human problems in the state's absence. I am convinced that life without the state will provide lots of opportunities for diverse cultural forms and ideological convictions to come to expression, and I suspect that the most effective way to move beyond the state may involve practical experiments in doing without it right now. Now, the reality is, I'm not in principle opposed to attempts to use electoral politics to challenge the state, but I think they're dangerous and they're often likely to be ineffective. I am excited by what I've seen here this weekend as people have talked about other possibilities. Great time at the Lola anti-war presentation yesterday, for instance, as people talked about the value of building agorist coalitions with people in areas like the underground dance party movement and the health food movement, who may not think of themselves as libertarians or anarchists, but who fall under the heavy hand of the state and can see the advantage of crafting a social infrastructure to which the state is just irrelevant. I think those kinds of experiments certainly deserve continued attention. Now, anarchists often spend a lot of time imagining what life might be like without the state, and that's a lot of fun. I confess I don't know. I don't have a plan, and if I did, I certainly wouldn't want to impose it on everyone else. The good news, maybe the best news actually about anarchy, is that there are more ways than you or I or anybody else can imagine to organize communities and solve problems. That's the point, right? That's why we don't want the state, because the state imposes uniform solutions to problems. I favor, therefore, what is sometimes called panarchy, or anarchy without adjectives. A stateless society ought to be hospitable to all kinds of different ways of being human. Now, I'm unapologetic about the fact that I'm a market anarchist. I favor human interactions in and through markets, both in the narrow sense of the cash nexus of commercial transaction and in the broad sense of the sphere of voluntary cooperation, which obviously includes kinds of interactions that aren't narrowly commercial. I'm a market anarchist, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy to defend it. But I think a stateless society ought to be hospitable to everybody from primitivists to technophiles and transhumanists, to proponents of markets and enthusiastic supporters of gift economies, to atheists and fundamentalists, to advocates of individual and communal ownership, localists and cosmopolitans. I don't want to impose a single vision on anybody. I want a world in which people can explore possibilities. Yeah. Decent voluntary communities and networks, and of course, just as is true today, decency won't be universal, will help people resolve disputes, provide protection against violence and injustice and risk, help to safeguard people from the effects of economic insecurity. But how this happens, what priorities it makes sense to adopt, how tasks will be allocated among the different overlapping communities and networks and associations with which people are affiliated, that's going to vary from setting to setting, and that's okay. Different approaches will reflect the experimental, creative process of discovery and invention that anarchy will make possible. There will likely be all sorts of communities in any imaginable stateless society. No doubt some of them will be geographic, so it'll be easier for people to manage some kinds of tasks by working together with people who live and work near where they do. A voluntary association of people operating a local hospital, for instance, will likely be made up in general of people who are geographically proximate. Moving people's bodies takes time and uses resources, and people presumably like to be able to take advantage of hospital care for their bodies quickly and efficiently. Of course, there will be no state, even in this case, to insist that anybody living in a given geographic area join a particular association or enforce any such association's demands for tribute. And there won't be any border guards or passport offices to keep people from moving to geographic region to geographic region, and so from affiliating with different geographically based associations.